welcome again. Welcome into the television version of Strategies for a Living. I'm marriage and family therapist David McMillan. I'm delighted that you've tuned in. Join with me today here on Strategies for a Living. Well, we're all about helping us live healthier, happier, and more peaceful lives in our bodies, in our minds, in our spirits, in our relationships here in the 21st century. We do that by engaging in important conversations with folks we like to call life strategists each and every time we do Strategies for a Living. And you know, I get to talk to some very, very interesting folks on the radio program. I've got one for you today. Are you a reader? There's nothing like relaxing with a good book. And I don't know if you've noticed, if you are a reader, there's a proliferation today of a category called historical fiction. And our life strategist today actually has already won a Pulitzer Prize for one of her books, and she's got a brand new book out. It's called Manhattan Beach. Now, it doesn't get much better when folks who review your books call your book a page turner and riveting. That's what has happened with, it's all of Jennifer Egan's books, but especially this new one, Manhattan Beach. It is historical fiction. It's got everything in it that you would possibly want, from gangsters and showgirls to killers and union men and even shipwrecks. So let's talk to Jennifer Egan today here on Strategies for a Living. Wow, what a pleasure it is. You know, you don't often, at least I don't often, get an interview with a Pulitzer Prize winning author. But I got one today. Jennifer Egan. Jennifer is the author of 5 previous books, including A Visit from the Goon Squad, which did win the Pulitzer Prize and the National Book Critics Circle Award. Also, The Keep, the story collection Emerald City, Look at Me, a National Book Award finalist itself, and The Invisible Circus. She has a brand new book out. It is called Manhattan Beach, and we'll get into that today. Pulitzer Prize winning author Jennifer Egan. What does that feel like when I introduce Pulitzer Prize winning author? That feel good?
Yeah, I think I'll never quite think that that's me, but I'm
yeah, you look around and say, who are they talking about? Where?
I'm surprised and happy every time I remember it.
What was it like, Jennifer, when you got the word that you had won? I mean, because you're a writer, you're an author, that's your craft. It doesn't get much better than winning a Pulitzer Prize. What was it like when you found out?
It was very shocking. I mean, it was just I couldn't believe it. In fact, my publicist called and I kept saying, "Are you sure? Are you sure?" Finally, she said, "Yes, I'm sure. Get home. You have to be interviewed." I'd never even won a raffle, I don't think, until A Visit from the Goon Squad. So I was just not one of those people who seem to win things. So it was a really amazing surprise and a kind of reorganization of my sense of, my level of luck in the universe.
Well, you're making it sound like, okay, you won things. The Pulitzer, you were recognized for an outstanding job at doing your craft, an outstanding job at writing. So, girl, you didn't win it, you won it. You earned it,
Well, thank you. I think one thing is just having judged prizes myself, I know that there really is some luck there, because it's, there's a group of people who make the choice, and you have the good fortune of somehow pleasing all of them, which is not easy to do, but there is a certain element of chance there. So I take it and bow down in gratitude.
You won it for A Visit from the Goon Squad. Many people who are listening to us right now, watching us right now, may have read A Visit from the Goon Squad, but many may not have. Tell us a little bit about that book and why it caught so much attention.
Well, it's a book very much about time and music. It follows a number of different people through their lives in a very non-linear way. So it consists of 13 chapters. Each one is about a different person, and each one is told in a very different way, as if they were all parts of different books, and yet they link up, and they follow, so we might see someone as a child and then see them a few chapters later as an adult. So the people are related to or some of them are related to each other to some degree, but it visits various worlds. One is, it follows a family on a safari in Africa in the 1970s. There's a chapter that's about the punk rock scene in San Francisco in the late 70s. There's a chapter that takes place in New York in the future. I guess it's not that as far in the future now as it was then, but about the early 2020s. And then there's one chapter that surprised people, which is told in PowerPoint, and that is also in the future. Takes place in the future in the California or the Arizona desert.
Wow. When did you know, Jennifer, that you were going to write books? Did you know that as a third grader? Did you know that as a seventh grader? Did you know that as an early college student? When did you know, I'm going to write books?
I did not know that as a kid at all. I was a very sciencey kid, and I really wanted to be a surgeon like my grandfather, who was an orthopedic surgeon, and he would talk over dinner about, hacking people open, and I just loved that. I was very ghoulish. I loved his medical books. I was fascinated by biology and dissection, but then I got a little squeamish as a teenager, and somehow that didn't appeal to me anymore. And then I really wanted to be an archaeologist. So I had various dreams, and I think that I do know exactly when I figured it out, though, which was I took a gap year between high school and college, and I was just desperate to see Europe. I had never been there. Being from California, it was a very long trip for my family, and we hadn't done that. And so I went by myself with a backpack to Europe on Freddie Airlines.
You're an adventurer. Wow.
I guess I am.
Yeah.
I guess I am. I worked for most of that year to earn the money to take the trip. Then I got a backpack and a Eurail pass, and I was traveling around, and I was it was amazing and fascinating, but it was also a little alienating. I was alone, very far from my family, with a 9-hour time difference to contend with, and of course, no internet.
Right.
So I think in that very solitary state, I recognized some things about myself, one of which was that writing was really an essential element of my relationship to the world. It was just, it had been there all the time, but I hadn't recognized it, and somehow I did in that somewhat lonely and even in moments kind of frightened state. So I guess that's why you take a gap year, right? I came to college knowing what I wanted to do.
Well, it certainly worked out for you. Now, your first book was
The Invisible Circus.
Yeah.
And interestingly, that you bring that book up, it's about a girl whose older sister has committed suicide during at the end of the 60s, and my protagonist follows her sister's itinerary through Europe, which was the trip she was taking when she died. And that itinerary was my itinerary.
Your itinerary. Wow. So you didn't know it at the time, but you were doing research. You were doing writer research.
It's exactly right. But because it was my first time and it was such a hard-won trip, I saved every map and I would circle all of the sites that I had seen. So I had this amazing evidence. I had a lot of artifacts from the trip, which actually were incredibly useful to me years later when I wrote that book.
When you have since from that first book, that first excellent book, The Invisible Circus, to today, Manhattan Beach, which we're going to be talking about today. You've written 6 books total, huh?
Yes.
And so, do you write daily? Do you write every day?
Mostly, yes. I can see why you asked, because you would think, well, that output could be higher. I do write. My process is fairly slow. I write my first drafts by hand always, even though I'm also a journalist and I use the computer, exclusively for that. But I find that with fiction, I'm trying to access a kind of unconscious part of myself that has much better ideas than my conscious mind does. And handwriting seems to be the key for me to doing that. So I write my first drafts by hand, and then I type them up, and then I edit by hand on hard copies. So it's much slower than it would be if I sat at a computer and we're looking at a screen, but it gets me the best material. And I do that every day, but the handwriting part can be a little slow. And then once I'm editing, it's much faster. But the other thing is my books are extremely different from each other. I have not someone who sort of mines a particular area again and again, and I think maybe that's another reason I'm not faster. There's a sort of seismic shift that has to happen between books. I always bring with me almost a kind of a leftover voice and point of view from the previous book that I have to let go of. Because it's never appropriate to the new one.
To the new book. Just for the record, Jennifer, I don't think you're slow at all. I just think you're good.
Oh, thank you.
Just for the record. We're talking with the author of, many books, including Pulitzer Prize winning A Visit from the Goon Squad. She's got a brand new book out. We're going to come back and talk about it. It's called Manhattan Beach. It's much anticipated if you follow Jennifer Egan, and a lot of you do. We'll be right back with more Strategies for Living. Jennifer Egan is our life strategist today. Be right back. Now. Okay, well, it is great to talk to authors of the stature of Jennifer Egan, and we've got more with her. I hope you're enjoying the interview with Pulitzer Prize winning author Jennifer Egan. Her new book, Manhattan Beach, we'll come back and talk more about it here on the television version of Strategies for Living. We'll be right back. Stay with us. More to come.
Acts can help you keep from letting it get you down. For example, while high blood pressure increases your risk for heart disease and stroke, you can control it. First, you need to know about it. Since high blood pressure often has no symptoms, it's important to check it regularly. Blood pressure is measured using two numbers: systolic, the pressure when your heart beats, and diastolic, the pressure between beats. A reading of less than 120/80 is considered normal. One of more than 140/90 is considered a problem. If yours is high, your doctor may suggest certain lifestyle changes, such as eat a healthy diet low in salt and fat and high in fresh fruits and vegetables. Be active. Try taking a brisk 10-minute walk 3 times a day, 5 days a week. Don't smoke. If you do smoke, quit as soon as possible. You can learn more from the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention at cdc.gov. You can help your child beat bullying. First, you and your child should know he or she is not alone. The U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention says 1 in 5 kids is bullied at school and 16% are bullied electronically. Next, consider these ideas for dealing with the problem. For one thing, try to get your child to develop his talents and positive attributes: music, athletics, art, so he can be more confident. Next, teach your child safety strategies, such as to seek help from an adult when feeling threatened by a bully. Talk about whom she should go to for help and role-play what she should say. Assure your child that reporting bullying is not the same as being a snitch. Help your child meet new friends in and outside of school. A new environment may provide a fresh start. Finally, make sure your child has a safe and loving home environment where he can take shelter, physically and emotionally, and always maintain open lines of communication with your child. More helpful advice can be found online at cdc.gov.
And welcome back into the television version of Strategies for Living. I'm marriage and family therapist David McMillan. Now, of course, you're watching Strategies for Living today, but you can listen to Strategies for Living. How do you do that? Well, Sunday mornings, 9:05 to 10, 1017 FM and News Radio 710 Keel. That's Sunday mornings, 9:05 to 10, and then Thursday afternoons, 2 to 3, on HealthyLife.net out of Los Angeles. And so, of course, you can also tune in anytime, www.strategiesforliving.com, probably about 600 or 700 podcasts that you can listen to anytime you want to there, and that includes our guest today. You'll find Jennifer Egan up there. Was I right? Riveting, page turner. Let's get back to Pulitzer Prize winning author Jennifer Egan, our guest today, our life strategist here on Strategies for Living. And we're back with Jennifer Egan, the Pulitzer Prize winning author of A Visit from the Goon Squad. Brand new book out. It is Exciting Manhattan Beach, and people have been waiting for this, Jennifer. So Anna Kerrigan, 12 years old, nearly 12 years old, and she and her father visit Dexter Stiles. And she figures out that this man somehow is crucial to her family's survival, right?
Yeah. She senses that Dexter Stiles is very powerful and that her father is afraid of him, which is a complicated thing to know about your dad when you're 11.
Yeah. She's also mesmerized by the sea, which is just beyond the house, and by some charged mystery between her dad and Dexter Stiles. What a setup, huh?
And it's also Depression era, so her family has been coming off a very, very hard time. Well, actually, sort of in the middle of a very hard time.
Yeah.
And it's, a kind of desperation that, is something my generation didn't experience too much. But yes, it's a charged visit for sure.
Now we go years later, and her father has disappeared. The country's now at war, of course, and Anna now works. She's a grown woman. She's working at the Brooklyn Naval Yard, and during the war, women are allowed to hold jobs that once belonged to the men, but now the men are soldiers, and so the women are doing those jobs, and she becomes a first, right?
Yes. She becomes a deep-sea diver, a civilian diver who helps to repair ships from the outside.
This is a pretty dangerous job for a young lady.
Well, yes, and no one really wants her to do it.
It's also a very exclusive occupation, high training, right?
Yes, exactly, and a very complex equipment. And as you say, high stakes in that if something goes wrong, it's extremely dangerous.
But vital to the war effort because the ships are coming into the Brooklyn Naval Yard. They're being repaired. She's doing literally work that can help win the war, right?
Very much so, yes. And in fact, the Brooklyn Naval Yard repaired, I think, some 5,000 Allied ships during the war. It was the largest builder and repairer of Allied ships in the world.
Wow. So that's the setup. That's the setting. Would this be called a historical novel? I mean, there's a lot in here that is historical.
I think you'd have to call it that. I mean, it's set in the past, and it's it not only is it set outside my lifetime, which required a fair amount of research, but the worlds that the book involved were all pretty intricate and required a lot of time to understand. One of which was deep sea diving at that time, and during which the equipment was different. Another was the merchant marine and Liberty ships, and U-boats and sort of that aspect of the war. And then another was the Navy Yard, as you say. And then finally, the world of organized crime, which was very deeply involved in the New York waterfront. Mm-hmm. And so that was another whole system that I needed to try to understand, to fathom, if you will. So it was a lot of research, which was actually quite fascinating, and I feel very enriched by having had the opportunity to do that research.
Now, she is one night at a nightclub, and she meets none other than Dexter Stiles. This is years since she has been introduced to him as an almost 12-year-old with her father. And she, what could we say without spoiling too much, Jennifer? She begins to get it.
Well, she certainly begins to wonder about her father's disappearance, because the story had always been, or the assumption had always been, that he left the family, and he was, as many men did at that time, and he was fairly unhappy for various reasons, one of which was that Anna has a severely disabled younger sister, which he finds very difficult to deal with. But I think the other thing is that she finds herself in a position to get to know Dexter Stiles without Dexter Stiles knowing who she is. So there's a kind of a case of, mistaken identity, or a kind of incognito element to the book, which I had a lot of fun with, I have to confess. There's something so kind of inherently dramatic about people who are undercover. And so she doesn't necessarily think of herself that way, but she develops, she begins to get to know Dexter Stiles a little, and of course she's wondering if she can find out if there's more to the story of her father's disappearance, and meanwhile he has no idea that she's anything other than, a young girl working at the Brooklyn Navy Yard.
Right. So there's a lot of intrigue in these just over 400 pages. We don't want to give too much away. We were talking, Jennifer, you and I, during the break about you were mentioning in the first segment that you begin your writing, you write by hand, and then you've developed this process, this writing process that you use. You type it up, then you edit it again by hand, and it works well for you, obviously. But we were talking about things flowing to you, from either your unconscious mind. I suggested maybe Carl Jung, the great Dr. Carl Jung, developed this idea of the collective unconscious. Do you think you tap into that? Did you tap into that writing Manhattan Beach?
Well, I don't know what it is. I guess it just depends in a way on one's belief system. But certainly, I did write a 1,400-page handwritten first draft of Manhattan Beach.
Wow.
And all of the story elements that are interesting and surprising, I can certainly promise you, came about in that unconscious way. It does not happen if I sit down and think about it. And all kinds of little connections that I would never expect. Just as one tiny example, actually, from Goon Squad, the first chapter involves a woman named Sasha meeting a guy named Alex. And that kind of gets us into the whole book. And I did not realize when I wrote that Sasha and Alex are the same name.
Really?
Sasha is a nickname for the name Alexander, and I think mostly in Russia that nickname exists. But there are an infinite number of little stories like that from my own work where connections I simply did not know about become manifest if I engage in this almost meditative state that I get into when I handwrite. Nowadays, it has the additional advantage of just getting rid of screens and technology generally, which for me really undermines a lot of those deep connections. But I was already doing it that way because I'm trying to find the things that I don't know consciously, and I seem to find them that way.
Yeah. I want to tease just a little bit, if I can, Jennifer, because back to Dexter, and I think it relates to what we're talking about here. Dexter wants to know what's beneath the surface of things.
Very much so. And in fact, that is what first draws him into criminal activity. His father owns a restaurant, and he begins to sense a kind of subtext that is never discussed, which is his father making payoffs to various people for protection, and his father loathes having to do this. But what Dexter begins to see is this world he didn't know about of well-dressed men and he can tell that they have a lot of power. And this kind of subsystem, this hidden world, is tremendously attractive to him. And he senses that it will be a route to upward mobility and a kind of worldly power that his father doesn't have. And he basically ingratiates himself with these men and enters their world.
The new book is Manhattan Beach, and folks, you got to get it. I tell you, it contains all of a Jennifer Egan novel. Stellar writing, of course, but slippery and shifting identities, characters wanting out, wanting to escape, and an unforgettable female protagonist. All there, all in Manhattan Beach from Jennifer Egan. Jennifer, thank you so much for the work you're doing. Keep up the great work. I can't wait till the next time we talk.
Me either. Thanks for having me on the show.
Wow, if you want a great book, then Jennifer Egan, any of Jennifer Egan's books are for you. The brand new one, Manhattan Beach, it's a follow-up for her Pulitzer Prize-winning book, Night at the Goon Squad, Visit to the Goon Squad. It's called Manhattan Beach. It's a little historical fiction for you. So check out Jennifer Egan wherever you buy books. And if you want to hear other wonderful authors like Jennifer Egan and many, many more, will tune into Strategies for Living. You're watching us today, but don't forget the radio version. That's where we started. 25 years ago, still there. News Radio 710 Keel 1017 FM. Sunday mornings 9:05 to 10. And now at healthylife.net. That's Thursday afternoons, 2 p.m. to 3 p.m. And also at www.strategiesforliving.com. And if today were the last day of your life, who would you call? And what would you say? Why are you waiting? Make the call. For Jennifer Egan and for all these great folks here at Bossier Parish Community College, I'm marriage and family therapist David McMillan. I'll see you next time here on Strategies for Living.